Have you ever been in a situation where you think, I really need X, and so you search high and low, and nothing. And so you go into the shops, and nothing. And you look online, and nothing. And you think to yourself, that's really annoying. I can't believe nobody's doing that. I really need it. Do you stay annoyed? Maybe you post a rant on Twitter. But do you actually do anything about it? About this time, 7 years ago, I was working in a consulting project which I really didn't like, with a manager who'd taken a strong disliking to me. I was bored, frustrated, and annoyed. But all of those things are a really good motivator when you're trying to figure out what you want to do next. Because the truth was, I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I knew I wanted it to be in fashion, but not necessarily clothes. And I'd been working on a few different things, and nothing was quite working out. And then, after years of never being able to find tights that actually matched my skin tone, or a nude which actually matched my nude, it sort of came to my head. It was very simple. I was going to create a company which did lingerie and hosiery that worked as a nude for women of color. And I remember sending off a text to one of my really good friends saying, I figured out what I want to do when I grow up. And that was just the start. I realized pretty quickly that I was going to need to save a lot of money to start my own business. And so I decided to switch industries and go back into finance. And by the end of that year, this was in 2011, I was working in a swanky new job in private equity fundraising, and it was great. I really liked my team. I bought a new iPad. I bought a few new designer dresses, and life was really good. And in short, I got distracted. Now, moving ahead to 2012, and it was the summer of the Olympics, and so I was in New York for work. And I was living at the time with a friend from university, and I shared this idea with her, and she thought it was fantastic. And so when I came back to London, I was really, really excited and, was ready to start working on this company. But work got busy, and as happens, I got distracted again. And then in May 2013, I got a late birthday card. And across the front, it said, it's time to start living the life you've always imagined. And on the inside was a really lovely message from my friend Mira. And she said how proud she was of me and how she was so looking forward to this company and how she couldn't wait to see me on the cover of Forbes one day. And needless to say, that was the kick that I needed. And the next day, I registered the company, I started the registration for the trademarks, and I started reaching out to manufacturers. And from that moment on, I was like a woman possessed, and it was wonderful. And I would sleep with a notebook beside my bedside table because I'd bolt up awake around 4 a.m. with different ideas of what I wanted to do for the business. And over the months, I attended different lingerie trade shows and met my manufacturer. And I won't go over all the details of research and development, but it is a pretty amazing thing to see something that's been in your head come to life. And once I'd gone to the factory to inspect the goods, then I started to focus on the photo shoot. Because at the time, I thought Nubian Skin was going to be e-commerce only. And so I knew that the images had to be amazing. And the photo shoot was so much fun. And we had amazing images. And then I went away on holiday. And at the time, I had about 50 followers on Instagram and maybe about 10 followers on Twitter. And I hadn't really thought about how I was going to market this company, which if you are going to start a business, that's a terrible idea. You need to have a marketing plan. But I put this image up of 4 girls who were in our first collection of lingerie. And I went off on holiday. And halfway through the holiday, my phone started buzzing. And I looked at my Instagram account, and I had 100 followers. And I realize that's not very impressive now. But back then I was a novice, and I was really excited that 100 people cared about what I was going to be doing. At the end of the week, I had 1,000 followers. At the end of 4 weeks, I had 20,000 followers. The campaign had gone viral, and I didn't really know what that meant until it happened to me. BuzzFeed did an article about us saying we were redefining nude. And then the Mail Online and the Independent contacted us for image rights. And our followers kept growing. Then Tandy Newton tweeted about the brand. And Kerry Washington retweeted an article about it. And it kept growing and growing and growing. And all of this was happening in August 2014 and September 2014. And we didn't actually have a product yet. And the e-commerce site wasn't live. But we had a blog, and we kept people updated with what was going on. And then in October 2014, nubianskin.com went live. I had done it. I had a seat at the table. And I had spent so much time up until that point worrying about getting there and actually attaining my goal. And once I was there, I had to figure out, what do I do now? As human beings, we put so much emphasis on attaining. There are countless books on getting what you want, how to get rich, how to become a CEO, how to start your own business, how to get a bikini body. And that isn't a bad thing. Having goals is wonderful, and getting them is great. But for any given goal that we do have, we need to ask ourselves 3 important questions. The first, what are you willing to give up? The second, what will you do once you get it? And the third, what do you have to gain? We all have goals. And sometimes we have goals because there's a true passion. And sometimes we have the goal because we like the idea of it or what we think is going to come with it. And other times we have goals because it's what's expected of us. And I'm not really going to say what I think is or isn't a good motivating factor, but we do need to be thinking about what are we willing to give up. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I love money. I love comfort. I love nice, shiny, expensive things. And honestly, just talking about it makes my heart beat a little bit faster. And when I was young, my mum used to say to me, Ade, you really like nice things. When you grow up, you need to have a good job. And my mum is a very wise woman. Before I started my company, I worked in finance. And I had clients who were really impressive and very intelligent, and I loved being around that. But I also very much enjoyed having the means to go on lovely holidays and buy nice things and not really worry about money. Now, a good indication of whether you really want something is what you're willing to give up to get it. As I mentioned previously, I had gone back into finance with the goal that I was going to save to start my business. But it was really hard for me to save when there was a Jimmy Choo sale going on. And I remember calling up one of my friends and telling her and complaining about how hard it was to save money. And she wasn't particularly sympathetic. And as a response, she invited me to come over to this apartment she was staying at. And this apartment belonged to an old boss of hers. And this woman's apartment was insane. And the best bit was her walk-in closet, the pinnacle of which was a shoe closet. She had an entire wardrobe dedicated to designer shoes. And as I'm sitting there, literally salivating over the shoes, my friend slams the door shut in front of me and says, "You will never have that, because you don't save." Needless to say, that was the kick that I needed to stick to my savings plan. And I thought I was actually in a pretty good position by the end of it. I'd saved up quite a lot of money to start my business. I'd also put aside an emergency stash, because a girl's going to need some things once she leaves her job. And once I actually launched the business, I thought I could exhale. But that's when things really came into focus, because once you start a business, you have to run a business. And I soon found out that my business liked money a lot more than I did. This was the reality of the situation. I had left a job in a lovely office in Mayfair and was now working from an attic with a slanted floor about the size of my bathroom. I had no job security. I missed the weddings of 2 of my really good friends, one in India and one in Kenya, because I couldn't afford to go and I didn't have the time. I was dealing with customer complaints. I was my own HR, admin, and cleaning woman. I spent all my money, literally every penny, even the emergency stash. I had stress like I had never known to exist. I was being rejected again and again and again, and I was terrified. That was the cost of getting what I wanted. And to be honest, if when I was starting out, somebody had given me a laundry list and said, this is what it's going to cost for you to get what you want, I'd have probably looked at that list and said, you know what, I'm good. That moment when I realized that this is what it meant to get what I wanted changed everything. And it changed my perspective. Because I had wanted to be an entrepreneur when I thought it meant being my own boss and making loads of money. And I had expected every day to look like this. But my reality was that my day-to-day, more often than not, looked like this. And that's actually a very flattering picture, because I will refuse to show anybody pictures of me when I was trying to build my warehouse. Now, basically, I had delivered this baby, and I couldn't give it back. And I needed to figure out what was I going to do. When we have a goal, we need to think about what are we going to do when we actually get it. Maybe you've always wanted to be a teacher. Well, what kind of teacher are you going to be? Or maybe you want a promotion to be a manager. Well, what kind of manager are you going to be? Or maybe you've just always wanted a puppy. Well, what do you do when that puppy vomits all over your cream-colored carpet? Or maybe you just want a certain amount of money in your bank account. Well, once you get it, what are you going to do with that money? When we reach our goal, we have to own it. And sometimes owning it is actually more daunting than the getting of it. When I first started my business, I told a handful of people, my immediate family, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and a few really, really good friends. And after the campaign went viral and I started getting approached by different reporters, I would sign off every email, Team Nubian Skin. And when the first articles came out, they all referenced the founder. And I wouldn't tell people who the founder was. And I was terrified because I felt that if it was a failure, then that was a reflection on me. And if people didn't like it, then somehow that was a reflection on who I was. But here's the thing. Standing in your position, owning it, really staking claim to it, is when you start to really live your goal. And I was so scared when I put it out there that it was me behind this company. But that's when I realized the importance of showing up. Because the woman that I created this company for showed up for me. And they taught me that it was really important that it was me, a young black woman, who had seen that the lingerie industry had ignored us for so long and did something about it. My showing up meant something for so many other people. And while I was hiding behind my company, I was giving up all the power that came from really standing in my position and showing everybody else that just because you're taken for granted doesn't mean that you can't do something about it. I was really fortunate to live a part of my childhood in Lagos, Nigeria. And so I saw people who looked like me in positions all the time. The president was black. The ministers were black. The teachers were black. My headmistress was black. The lawyers were black. The doctors were black. I saw women owning their own companies, whether those were market stalls or national companies, who looked like me. So in that situation, race wasn't a factor. In London and in many other places around the West, people don't have that. And so when next time you're thinking about maybe wanting to publish a book, or maybe you want to go for a promotion, or maybe you want to start a business, or maybe it's just writing that blog post, don't think about that goal in abstract, but really think about what it might mean for the people who look up to you. Because when you take that position, it has ramifications far beyond just yourself. And that's when you realize all there is to gain from it. Because yes, it's costly, and that cost may be emotional or financial or with time, but it's also incredibly wonderful. When I moved into that attic was my kingdom, and I was so proud. And I felt like I was fulfilling something that I didn't even know there was to fulfill. And when I got emails from women saying, "Thank you for showing me that I matter," You can't put a price on that. I'd always felt really self-sufficient, but once I started my business, I realized how much help I actually needed, and I've become so much better at asking for help. So this picture is of my cousins, David and Damini, and it's probably about midnight. And I had moved from that tiny little attic office into an office warehouse, and it was the weekend, and on Monday, my one employee was going to be coming in, and we didn't have desks. And so I called them up and said, I really need to go to IKEA. And they came with me, and I had IKEA meatballs for the first time. And we bought a bunch of flat pack furniture, and then they came back to the warehouse with me and helped me put it up. Yes, it costs a lot, but you also gain so much. My heart has learned to expand with gratitude for all the people who've sacrificed for me. And frankly, I'm still figuring it out. There isn't a day that goes by that I am not nervous or scared or vulnerable, but also feel bold and excited at the same time. And I've had more failures than I want to remember. And I don't know how many more failures that I'm going to have. But here's what I do know. If we want our voices to be heard, we have to take a seat at the table. And I'm going to say that again. If we want our voices to be heard, we have to take a seat at the table. And sometimes that seat's already there, and all we have to do is step up and take it. And sometimes there isn't a seat at the table, and you have to take your plastic folded chair and drag it and sit it next to a beautiful leather ergonomic chair, but you're still there. And maybe the table moves and you need to drag your chair to keep up with it, but you're still there. The important thing is what impact you make while you're in that position. And you may be there forever, for a decade, for 5 years, or just for a month. But once you take that seat, how will you own it? Once you have it, what are you going to do with it? Thank you.